And our presenter this morning, Michelle, is going to be referencing some materials, a guidebook that they've put together, and some tools. And all of that information will be on the website. I also will be sending out an email to everybody who's on the web seminar this morning after the web seminar with links so that you can go directly and find all of the information that's referenced during this morning's web seminar. Next slide. So I am so excited to introduce our panelists this morning. We've got three folks with Harder & Company, which is, they're going to tell you a little bit more about themselves and what they do. We've got Michelle McGee, Lorraine Park, and Carrie Tam. And we here at the John Burton Foundation have been working with them for several months now on a variety of things related to the California College Pathways Initiative, including this piece around getting the most out of your meetings and leadership development skills. And so they've just done a fantastic job putting together all kinds of resources that we'll be sending out after the webinar to help support you in this effort. So I'm super excited to turn it over to Michelle McGee with Harder & Company. Michelle?
Yes, thank you very much, Debbie. Good morning, everyone. I'm very excited to be here as well, as is our team here at Harder & Company. Just to sort of restate what Debbie said, we have been working with the John Burton Foundation and the California College Pathways Initiative, the Stewart Foundation as well, to provide support that helps strengthen the functioning and sustainability of the initiatives and hopefully translates into helpful tips and tricks for those of you doing all of this great work. I am particularly excited to work on this kind of project because in my role as a consultant now, it's my pleasure to bring experience that I have from actually working on the ground myself with foster youth and transitional age youth in a variety of settings, education as well as social service, to and now to help the folks who are working with them get what they need to move the work forward. So welcome and excited, and I'd like our other folks to take a minute to say hi so you recognize their voices. Lorraine?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Lorraine Park, and I'm a Senior Research Associate based here in the Los Angeles office of Harder & Company. And like Michelle, my background is in social work, and before beginning a career in evaluation, I worked as a social worker and in education as a teacher. And so the work that all of you do is near and dear to my heart as well, and I look forward to working with you.
Thanks, Lorraine. And Carrie?
Good morning, everyone. This is Carrie Tam, and I'm a research associate in the San Francisco office. And my prior experience includes working in the public sector as well as nonprofits that serve children and families. And I'm very excited to be a part of this webinar. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks, team. Moving on, so I referenced this earlier. So Harder & Company, we are a comprehensive social research and planning firm, and we have offices across the state. And so some of us are in the San Francisco office, and Lorraine is in the LA office today. And I think I spoke to this earlier, and we're just really excited to be part of this at Harder & Company. So today's webinar is the first of a two-part series from the John Burton Foundation that aimed at working with you to help strengthen your networks and provide some technical assistance, but really tools that you can have at your fingertips to help make your day-to-day work better or easier, maybe, perhaps. And then today we're going to focus on getting the most out of your meetings. And one of the reasons that we're doing that is, as you all know, meetings are an essential part of how we do our work and how we not only work internally with each other, but how we work externally in creating and achieving collaboration. And since most of us do work in teams, that means we're doing a lot of work in meetings. So for today's session, we want to, we have some learning objectives. And I just want to say something about that before I read this to you, which is that I understand and our team understands, as does the John Burton Foundation, that all of you spend a lot of time in your meetings and have a lot of skills already. And this is an opportunity really to reinforce what you already know and have a moment to reflect on that, which is very hard for all of us to do in our very busy schedules, and hopefully gain some new ideas and some new tips or tricks or you know, ideas that you can pull out of your pocket in the moment when things may be not working in the way that you want, or just to make what you already do stronger. And I know that you receive meeting evaluations after these webinars, and I hope that you give us honest feedback about whether we achieve these learning objectives, which is to take a moment to step back and understand how to effectively plan meetings, to learn the importance of establishing meeting goals and developing clear, helpful agendas, understanding team behavior and group dynamics, which we're going to touch on some today. The second webinar will go deeper into that area, and have a ready-to-use guide and tools to put into practice, which Debbie mentioned earlier. All of that will be on the website, and we've actually put a guide together. So we've framed this as setting the direction. So it's sort of your GPS to effective meetings. It's like, so how do we navigate from start to finish? And why do we want to do that? I think that if I were in a room with all of you right now, I might ask you to raise your hand if you have been in a meeting that, one, you felt wasted your time because you weren't quite sure what the discussions was all about, or whether or not your meeting started and ended on time because you had clearly structured your day so that you had enough time to drive to the meeting, but not enough time to spend an extra hour without lunch sitting in a meeting room. And I would suspect that out of the currently 60 folks who are on this call, I would take a fair bet that at least half of you would raise your hand that in the last 30 days prior to the holidays, not counting the holidays themselves, that has happened to you, and may have even happened to you yesterday or might happen to you this afternoon. I know it happened to me on Monday. And so we have these pitfalls that and the time and the ambiguousness of some of these conversations create frustration. It bores people who are in the room. It discourages all of us from participating. And sometimes we walk out saying, wow, what were we supposed to achieve in that meeting, and why couldn't we just have had an email chain? So some of the fixes or ways that we all try to make that not happen when we run meetings ourselves or when we help other people plan meetings is to try to be very clear about our purpose, to make sure that what we're discussing, that we're clear about, are we having a discussion? Are we going to decide something? What do we hope to accomplish today? That the meeting fits into some plan. Sometimes a meeting is very specific about a particular issue, but it usually fits into something we're trying to do. It could be that we're trying to improve the way we work together. It could be that we're working together to think about how to bring more K-12 partners to the table to support transitions, or to work across campuses to plan some campus visits. And that we want folks to feel, we want group input, we want folks to feel that they have a voice and that we really care about what they're saying. And we summarize those ideas here in what we're calling pitfalls and fixes. So one way to, how we think about this is that we think about it in terms of phases, that all meetings, whether it is a one meeting or a series of meetings that's working towards one of those goals that we talked about earlier, happens in phases. And that it is important to carefully think through each of those three phases. And even if we're not always in that place, we're like, oh, let me just sit here for a minute and think about this meeting that I have to have on Friday and what these three phases are, to be conscious of the fact that there's planning before the meeting, there's things that happen during the meeting and then after the meeting. And I think about this just from my own experience, that in direct service, how we think about, and many of you think about, how much time do I need to spend planning the face-to-face session that I'm going to have with this young person, or with the meeting that I'm going to have with the chancellor, or with the division department head, and that for every moment or for every hour that we have a meeting, we need to put some time into the planning of that meeting. So we're going to now talk a little bit about how those phases are different and what some of the tips and tricks are for thinking about it. And they really do build on each other. And again, I want to re-emphasize that I understand that all of you are very busy and that you have a certain amount of time set aside to plan meetings. But I think that it is helpful to think about it this way. So the first phase is before the meeting. So what is it that we want to try to think about? And some of them are, we want to really understand, so what are we trying to do here today? What is our actual meeting goal for today's meeting? And how might we frame that goal so that it helps us create an agenda that, that is a navigation that really builds on each other, on each topic, and that has some clear times associated to it. How do we decide who it is that should attend and gather their contact information? So some of these things are logistical, and we know that we may not have a lot of choice, for example, who attends some of our meetings, or whether or not we have a proper room. But when we are inviting people perhaps who we don't work with regularly, or we're trying to plan a half-day retreat, things like light and room arrangements and having enough space for people, and thinking about, are we going to be in classroom style, or are we going to be in at round tables, really make a difference. I had an experience recently, planned a retreat, wanted to not be too controlling and let go of the room arrangements, and showed up for a retreat with about 50 people in a room that actually only fit 15. So lesson learned yet again, even after I've been doing this for a very long time. Sending out the agenda and the logistics in advance, even if it's an email that says, reminder, meeting tomorrow, we're meeting in room 2A, we'll see you at 10 o'clock. Meeting will last till noon. For those kinds of meetings that are more complicated, or that are longer, or that are inviting folks that you don't work with regularly, really having knowing who's going to show up, how many people, so having somebody be able to collect the responses and to do some follow-up is helpful. And also, and again, this is in recognition that not every meeting needs sign-in sheets, but for some meetings, it's important to know who's coming, especially if it's a series of meetings, because what I find is that it helps create, it helps me plan something we're going to talk about a little bit in phase 2, which is what are our agreements of how we're going to work together. That might include having folks who weren't able to attend the first in a series of meetings if what we're trying to do is land on a plan for engaging some local schools that we haven't been able to work with before, or child welfare agency division that hasn't really been involved, but that we would really like to be involved in our project, and help to get them up to speed if they aren't able to attend all of the meetings in the series. And and we also and again, the logistics and the content. So the logistics part are the rooms, the time, some of the RSVPs and the sign-in sheets, but the content is about the meeting goals and creating an agenda that resonates for people and that actually matches what it is you're trying to accomplish. And there's 4 components. So we're going to dive deep on just one or two of these areas under phase 1. So one is the meeting goals and the meeting purpose. So there's sort of 4 components to establishing meeting goals. And those include thinking about the purpose. So what's the purpose of the meeting? There may be more than one, and I'm just sort of rephrasing and summarizing what I just mentioned earlier. The content goals, what do you think is most important for people to know? What kind of information do they need to be exposed to or needs to be brought to the table that they need to get up to speed for this meeting? And is there anything you need to bring forward from the last meeting, the seminar that you went to, which is why everyone is, or a conference that everyone went to, they got excited about something that happened at the end of the conference, and you wanted to bring that information forward. What decisions need to be made, if decisions need to be made, and are the right people going to be in the room to do that? And in general, what do we want to accomplish? I sometimes used in my head a little acronym called POP. What's the purpose? What's the outcome, which is you can define as what is the result, and what's the process that we're going to use, which speaks to your agenda. And I like that. It reminds me sometimes when I'm trying to stay focused. And then long-term goals, if there are, how does this fit into the work that you're doing? Just so that I think people really appreciate the connection between an individual piece of work and sort of the bigger piece. And then group input. Is this what are you asking from this group? Is this group coming to bring you new ideas or to share their ideas? Is this group trying to make some recommendations that they're going to give to the department or to the John Burton Foundation? Is this group trying to make some decisions? And so asking these questions, what do we expect from the folks who are coming? What will they be doing? Being really clear if it's an input, recommendation, or decision. And do you primarily need advice? And which of them, and how do you say that very clearly at the beginning of the agenda? And then developing the agenda. So we've just talked about this, that there are sort of three essential types of agenda items. There's information items, discussion items, and decision items. And usually an agenda will flow and navigate from sort of information, even if it's just here's an update of what we did from our last meeting. We didn't finish this discussion, so we're going to continue it today, and we're going to move really quickly to decision, or this is information items, and we're really going to stick in and stay in the area of discussion, and because we're going to talk about two topics that require your feedback and that we need to flesh out a little bit more before we move it to some other group or to some other phase or to some kind of decision. And decisions are really items that require agreement from the group. So some tips, and I talked about one of them, which is I like this little POP kind of acronym that I use for myself, but it's to stop a minute and say, does the meeting flow? Are our agenda items arranged in a logical manner? Do we have some kind of transition from one to the other, like we just talked about? How much time is allocated for each item? And then are the agenda items a good fit for your group? So is this a group who, if we need to make a decision, is authorized to make decisions? Or is this a group that can make a recommendation to a decision-making group? And I found that that is one of the most important, and just to emphasize being clear about that with a group, because there's nothing more frustrating to a group of folks who come together to think they're going to make a decision and then find out that really it's just input. And are the activities that we're talking about, so if it is a decision and if this is a new group, is this group ready to jump into decision making at the beginning of at a first meeting, or do we need at least 2 meetings to get there, or do we need at least 3 hours in a meeting? So it's all about trying to figure that out. And then also, as I know many of you know, that there's areas that you already walk into, or when you're planning, you know it's an area where there is a lot, has been disagreement in the past, and you really need to think through how to move people from a place of having a lot of tension around an issue to some sort of agreement about it. And that really speaks to, again, are the agenda items a good fit for what you're trying to do that day? And we actually have a sample agenda that's related to the kind of work that you do in your guide. I'm not going to go through it here. You'll be able to access it if you, the guide has some templates that hopefully you'll all find useful. And we also have, again, Debbie referenced this earlier, that we really wanted to be as concrete as possible. So in the guide itself, we provided these templates. And here's a sample meeting planner checklist. Again, because I could imagine that you would look at this and say, well, yeah, but this isn't really useful for all of our meetings. It might not be. This is the kind of comprehensive checklist that would be useful for an all-day retreat, but there are pieces of it that are. So it's kind of a pick and choose depending on the types of meetings that you're running and where you are with that. So that's, we're going to move on to phase 2. So all of those tips, and there are more ideas in the guide around planning the meeting, but those are two of the big ones: getting your meeting goals clear and having an agenda that actually has processes and topics that lead you through to achieving your goal. So phase 2, during the meeting, we talked a little about this earlier, the concept of starting and ending on time. And again, it seems sometimes when I even look at this myself, I think, wow, this seems so simplistic, but I know that we spend a lot of time in meetings that do not start and end on time. Personal pet peeve that I have, and one of the things that, so I just wanted to say that. Reviewing the agenda, taking a moment to make sure that the people in the room actually agree with the agenda, establishing ground rules if necessary, because I know this is not always necessary. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Making introductions and making sure that everyone knows each other, and distributing a sign-in sheet if that's something you need to do. And again, I realize that many of the meetings that you have on a day-to-day basis, you don't really need to do that, although it is a way to sort of help people understand, or without having to point it out, who's showing up for these meetings and who isn't. Designating roles, watching the time, and confirming some agreements and major decision points. We're going to talk for a minute about tips for keeping on track, because the time issue, I think really, when it's handled well and folks start to trust that the meetings are going to start and end on time, I have found better participation and more willingness to come to meetings. And I think that checking the duration of each agenda item, so sometimes it just happens that there needs to be more conversation about a particular agenda item than you had hoped, and there's a hard stop for the meeting at noon, and you're still on agenda item 2, and you have 5 agenda items at 11:15. So one tip, and I'm sure many of you do this, is you check and negotiate for more time. We did this on Monday. I had a meeting that was supposed to end at noon. It was very clear to me at 10 to 12 that the topic that we were on was really important. So we stopped. We negotiated for more time. People checked their calendars. We decided that it was worth another hour, and that we needed to get some snacks because people were really hungry. So we did all of that, and were able to finish that agenda item. And sometimes it also includes saying, okay, we can't go beyond noon, so which agenda items can we drop? Can we follow up by email on those, or do we want to pick them up at the next meeting? And then another is discussing ground rules for setting expectations. So I want to talk a little bit more about ground rules. So ground rules are one of those areas I'm hearing, and maybe this is just my own projection, some folks on the call thinking, oh, really, ground rules? Ground rule, we know, we are in a lot of meetings. We know that ground rules are, I find them a little bit not so helpful, or it seems like, you know, we've been meeting together for a long time. So when should you use ground rules? Because ground rules don't have to be things that say, oh, everybody's voice it needs to be heard, step up, step back. You know, some of the more typical ones, we want no judgments, make I statements. You know, those are some kinds of ground rules. But there are also ground rules that help set meeting behaviors and help the group operate more successfully, and those are more sort of granular. Like if you expect conflict, if the group is under a time constraint, if there's a history with this group of either a little bit of unproductive behavior that you anticipate, or if the group is working together for the first time, it's helpful to say we stop and end on time. If we have a topic that someone wants to introduce, but it's not on the agenda, we chart pad it, but we don't pivot in the moment. We ask folks to turn out, to hold their questions until the end, however it is that the ground that you want. But it's really to try to establish a culture for the group, particularly if you're going to be working together for a series. And I know, again, that it's one of those things that we talk a little bit about in the guide. It doesn't always work in every meeting, but it is worth thinking about. And sometimes it really is worth coming back to and saying, you know, we didn't establish any rules for this group when we started, but it seems like the topics are more complicated than we had hoped, or it's taking us longer to get through them. So I really want to introduce this idea. What do you think about having some ground rules? And the last time we had a meeting, people were really frustrated because they're not, you know, people are checking their cell phones and we're not turning them off. So maybe that's one that we could have. And do people have any suggestions? Get some agreement, and then come back and refer to the rules. When that's one of the best things about rules is that it isn't personal. Then it's really like we have these rules so that we can establish them. You don't even have to have them. I know a lot of times they're on a tear sheet. You can just have them on the back of an agenda. That's another tip. Another for phase 2, how to make meetings run smoothly, is thinking about defining key roles. And so the key roles in a group, as most of you know, are someone to take notes, someone to facilitate or navigate the meeting, somebody to keep time, and then folks who are team members, part of the participants. It is not always possible or even does it make sense to have different people in these roles, but it is often helpful to identify, are notes going to be taken? Are they going to be shared? Who's going to do that? Can we rotate that? They don't have to be comprehensive notes. They can just be bullets around what we, you know, the main points that we had today, and certainly any decisions or next steps, and keeping time. And so if you're comfortable doing a couple, you know, or you need to do most of those roles, but it's also a great way to get participants involved and asking them to help you out. So I think that having a timekeeper lets everyone know when that there is time for a given agenda item. I think it actually reinforces this idea and gives people confidence that you really will start and end on time. And the same thing around note taker. I really do. I find it, even if it's 4 bulleted items of what happened at the meeting, I think it's really helpful. One of the things I like to do at the end of a meeting is just put up a quick kind of just a table that says, here's the action item, here's who agreed to move it forward, and here's when we're going to get to it again. And that's can be a way to summarize what happened. I wish I was in the room so I could get some feedback from you on this. And so I want to talk a little bit about the pros and cons of rotating the facilitator role, because I think that is one area that we often debate, because we want people to be involved in the meeting, and we don't want to also have to hold responsibility for doing that. So I find that so I wanted to talk a little bit about the pros and the cons, and I think that the pros are that it does allow group members to practice their facilitation skills. It also helps build ownership for everyone on the team. It draws out folks who are more quiet by nature, quiet group members, and it allows them to have a particular role. It supports them having a particular role and to step forward. And it can build team cohesion and collaboration, because we really are saying we're in this together and we're all going to participate. Some of the things that don't always work so well, and so again, deciding when to use this concept of rotating the facilitator, I think, depends on how well you know this group, whether there are other folks who are trained to run the meetings in the way that you want them run or that you think they need to be run. So it can dilute the connection between one meeting and the other. So that's, I think, pretty straightforward. So if you're trying to bring forward ideas, you're having a series of meetings, because it's a series of 3 meetings that are going to result in a decision about campus visits or about bringing in new partners or developing a new addition to a curriculum or some materials, then it cannot be helpful in that bringing that information forward. It does require additional planning. So there is around selecting and prepping. So I think that it requires more coordination outside the meeting. It may not have to be a lot of time, but it does require some time so that everyone is kind of on the same page, that these are our group in fact, these are our group agreements for this series. Our group agreement is that we're going to rotate the facilitators and that the facilitators are going to talk to each other in between meetings. It requires group members to adjust to different styles, and so that can take some time too. So in some ways it can feel like you're building a whole new group every time that you meet. And I think that most of you can think of a time when that's worked and a time when it hasn't. And I think that making the connection back to what kinds of meetings did it work for. So it worked better when it was informational. It worked better when we were working on some campus materials, as opposed to a new project or a new activity, or a plan to increase partnerships. And then the other is conference call tips and tricks, some of which we're using today on the webinar, which is less than 2 hours. I think that you lose people's attention if you have long conference call meetings. Use file sharing. So for this meeting, we will share the materials after, not before, and always have a backup plan. Hard to have a backup plan for webinars, but for actual in-person meetings, but for conference call tips and tricks, one of the backup plans might be that we send out the materials ahead of time, or we send an email that says, well, the conference call isn't happening today, so here's, please go through these webinar materials on your own, and we'll set a call for a week from today because the phones didn't work today, which sometimes happens. Also something that has happened to us, planning a conference call meeting or a webinar and having the general telecom not work that day. And so when should you have a conference call meeting? And I think you probably know this, is when participants are in different geographic locations and time zones, and you actually need to have a conference call. When an agenda is primarily informational items, and that you're sharing updates rather than a discussion or decision items, although for groups who have worked together and you can build up to actually making decisions at that meeting. Again, that would be around the preparation, going back to how do you prepare for a conference call where you're making decisions, when there aren't any language barriers, and when it's most efficient, again, around the geography, travel time, or that you had planned on getting together, but there's some storm that is brewing, or there's, in California, it would be a rainstorm. And then for participants, to really make sure that everyone is identifying themselves when they're speaking, that if there's ideas that people want to share, what does this mean, brainstorm before a meeting? If there's ideas that folks want to share, so collecting people's ideas before the meeting, particularly if we're trying to make a decision around what folks are thinking before we all get on the call, so that we can a little bit fast forward through some of the agenda items, and getting input from everyone really helps be able to say we're prepared as we step into this call. Still having a facilitator that's asking folks to respond in sequence, and then not putting the call on hold while you're participating. So that's just a kind of how to make meetings work effectively. It's sort of my tips for a successful conference call. And we have more information on that in the guide called Getting the Most Out of Your Conference Call Meetings. Phase 3, after the meeting. So again, as we talk about this, I've mentioned this as we've moved forward, recapping major decision points and timelines, and having those in writing is very, very helpful. Wrapping up the meeting minutes and distributing them to attendees, collecting evaluation feedback forms, which we will be doing, and follow up with participants. So for this meeting, for this webinar series, we are providing a guide that recaps the information. We will, it's being recorded, and all of the information will be posted on the website as well as distributed to everyone, and a evaluation form will be circulated. And so this is, and then following up with participants. Again, this goes back to what we talked about earlier. What kind of meeting is it? How intensive does the follow-up need to be? Can it be just an email saying thank you very much, here's the 3 things that we decided. Debbie and Carrie will be following up on items 1 and 2, and item 3 Michelle is going to take on, and Sophie, who was participating on the call, has agreed to move item 4 forward. So it's about keeping up the momentum and recapping the major decisions, finalizing a timeline for next steps in action plan. So we are actually going to have 2 months to come to finalize our work, or to end up with something that we can all distribute in terms of campus materials. We're going to plan our campus visit schedule over the next 30 days, and we will begin the visits in March, and we will have a plan around that. And then again, we talked about this a lot, meeting minutes and distributing. If we, depending on the intensity or the complication of what you're trying to achieve through this series of meetings, making follow-up calls and is also helpful, and sending out follow-up correspondence. So there may be materials that you're distributing afterwards that people have asked for. But it's really, I think, the core here is the glue. So really the glue to trying to keep people connected and moving the work forward, so that folks don't feel disconnected once the meeting is over, and have those calls that I've sometimes had after attending a meeting, where I call someone and say, was there something I was supposed to do? Do you remember when they said we were going to have the next meeting? So it's really nice to have that all laid out. Again, it builds confidence. It builds, as we said earlier, builds people's connection and buy-in, and it helps build collaboration and a stronger team. Back to what we talked about earlier, trying to improve, to make stronger relationships, and also which ultimately helps us have more sustainable programs. We have a meeting minutes template in the guide. So for any of these sort of tips, we did provide templates in the guide. It is a comprehensive template, but there are pieces of it that I think, again, are helpful. So if in looking at this, it would be kind of highlights. What are the 3 major highlights? And I often adapt my meeting templates to say key discussion highlights, because I don't have time to write narrative on every one, but I can just have quick bullet points, and again, the action items. And as you can see, or you will see from the guide, the action items, the person responsible, and the timeline, that can just be a quick summary on a tear sheet at the end of a meeting, and that can be the only thing that you distribute. So I find that to be really helpful. Before we move, Lorraine, did you, I just wanted to give you a moment to share maybe a tip from your last meeting and something that you did for follow-up that worked.
Hi, everybody. I just wanted to underscore the importance of this documenting the next steps from meetings, and I think that I have been in those meetings, and I have to say I probably at one point have led a meeting where we didn't really summarize the action steps that were to follow. And so I think even Michelle talked about the importance of tear sheets and kind of visual reminders of to people in the group in the actual meeting. So what I like to do is during the meeting itself, just jot those next steps down as decisions are being made, so that there's a visual reminder to the group of kind of the key decisions and next steps that are made. And then those can also be sent out to people. And if you are really limited for time and don't have time to type up formal notes, you can also use technology and take a picture with, most people have smartphones now, take a picture of that tear sheet and send that out to the group too.
Thanks, Lorraine. That's actually, I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think the visuals, and we didn't talk that much about that, although we have the examples in the guide. I think visuals are really important, and they don't have to be complicated. But I think, or even personally, I'm not the best drawer in the world. Didn't do very well with straight lines in kindergarten, but I do use tear sheets a lot, and I attempt to draw, and I think it's really very helpful for folks to just see the agenda, and whether it's a piece of paper in front of them, or if you didn't have time, if it's just the email that you sent that you printed out, or you put 3 bullet points up on a tear sheet, and then the summary and the next steps. I think even meeting times, we're having 3 meetings, these are the dates, these are the places, all of those, and the cell phones and the taking the pictures, which sometimes we also then just share. We just, if you really don't have time, but you've to send out a lot of taking a picture of what happened in the meeting and just attaching that to an email that said, thanks everyone, and here's what we did today, I think can be extraordinarily helpful. So I just wanted to kind of recap that before we moved on, so the visual part. So we want to talk a little bit and kind of preview for a moment what the next webinar will be about. And so there's one thing to talk about. Here's the 3 phases of the meeting. And that's very important because it sets you up for success. I mean, I think it's really very foundational, and I find it very, very helpful. The next part of making a meeting work is sort of understanding how teams come together and team behavior. And I know that and just to preview, in the next webinar, we'll be going a little bit deeper on team behavior, tips and tricks for managing team behavior. But I think we wanted to start today with just some ideas for you to ponder and to think about as you look at the guide. So understanding the different stages of team behavior really can help considerably when discussing issues and making decisions as a group. So as you know, that every group that comes together, because you all work in groups all the time, even if you've worked with these folks individually for a long time, there is a way that a group has to form. And there's lots of information out there on the formation of groups and the phases of that, and most of you, I'm sure, have studied that in school and think about it a lot. But the one way that we like to think about it, and we've worked a lot with is the stages of what we call convergent and divergent thinking, which are these sort of terms. What do they mean? So it really means that for me, I like the visual. I think of it as a diamond visual, that people come together and they have a lot of different ideas, and they bring them to the table for every time we come together as a group. And during the process of getting from where we all have a lot of different ideas to where we actually need to narrow and make some decisions about those ideas or to make some choices, we go through what we call, we have borrowed from a trainer that we worked with for a long time, this concept of the groan zone. So no matter what, it's that time when you think, oh my goodness, are we ever going to get through the generating ideas, this kind of free-for-all open discussion, the fact that everybody is bringing some other version of what we're talking about to the table, and we're not quite yet on the same page for how we're thinking about this idea. So we're still having open discussion, we're bringing all these viewpoints to the table, it's a little bit chaotic, it feels a little bit like chaos sometimes, which again we can help control by having clear agendas and having good questions to guide the discussion. But even when we do that, there's always going to be some lack of clarity in this phase, and some confusion, and perhaps in the most extreme sense, it can feel a little bit chaotic. But what knowing that this is sort of the normal group process, whether we come together for one meeting or a series of meetings, we always have some version of this process that we're doing. And then we want to see clearly through to the other side, through what we call this groan zone, which is kind of a stage that is the bridge between when we have a lot of ideas and we're trying to narrow our ideas. And this is a stage where different ideas and needs are maybe synthesized kind of here. There's these 6 ideas, And it feels messy, but it's really important because it's the stage where new solutions can emerge, and where we have opportunities to summarize what all those different ideas are in order to get to a more convergent place where we're starting to get more focused. Maybe we're narrowing our ideas, and we're evaluating our alternatives, summarizing and sorting, and arriving at some kind of conclusions. And I think that we talked a lot about this. So we talked about visuals. So in the divergent thinking, we just talked about this, that there's a lot of ideas are being generated, and we want to get them all out because we want voices to be heard. We want to know. We want to think outside the box. All of those things are important. And then we want to get to this convergent place where those ideas become less messy, more organized, and we actually can imagine making some decisions about them. For today, we're just going to talk a little bit about what are some tips for each stage of these of group dynamics. So under divergent thinking, so what are the kinds of things and techniques that you might use when we're trying to do that? Well, brainstorm. So a brainstorm is a very typical way that we use to get lots of ideas out on the table. And we're going to talk more about this at the next webinar, but brainstorming is useful and also needs to be contained. So my tip around this is 20 minutes of brainstorm is usually a good amount of time. We're using active listening skills. So we're really open to hearing what folks are saying. We're trying to draw out all those different opinions so that we get perspectives out early in this phase so that people feel heard and they get ready to move on to the other two stages. In the grown zone stage, in the stage where we're actually trying to emerge and bridge from lots of ideas to sorting and selecting ideas, we use ground rules. This is a place where ground rules can be really helpful. And especially if we have many more ideas on the table than we thought. If there are some that are a little bit polarizing, we can use our ground rules to say, remember, we decided that we wanted to get all our ideas out, that we were going to listen without judgment, that we were going to give it 20 minutes. I mean, we can use our rules to help us. We also then can, just a little bit like, let's make a deal. So what can we accept? So can people get behind this idea? Is this an idea we want to defer? Where you're actually engaging in active conversation about which ideas might fall out. So where is the low-hanging fruit that we can just kind of all agree would be good ideas? If things are feeling a little tense or there's just a lot going on and people need just to step back for a minute, taking a break, using body language to help normalize what's happening. So I find a lot of times just the normalizing part can be, here's where we are. We are in a place where right now we're not reaching agreement. There's a little bit of tension in the room. People seem a little bit frustrated, and that's exactly where we expect it to be right now. So let's take a break, come back, and sort through these ideas. In a situation where it appears that you're not going to make any progress, sometimes it's a good idea to say, I don't think we're going to be able to get through all this today. Maybe we should stop, agree on some next steps, because we've done a lot of work. We've gotten a lot of good ideas out today. And then finally, we want to move to a place of agreement and convergence where we're generating a list of options. We're agreeing on some criteria. Perhaps we've decided that we want to just take a quick vote where you're using, again, the concept of visuals. We have 3 ideas up there. We're using some dots or everyone gets a different color pen, and we're summarizing and rating some areas of agreement. And we're going to talk in more detail about techniques in the in the next webinar for active listening, for managing conflict and difficult people, and for managing the group. But for today, we wanted to just throw this concept out there of team behavior. And just to go back for a moment to the visual, that all groups, when they're trying to work together, go through these stages of from divergent thinking to convergence, and go through this kind of messy groan zone of ideas. To give you, have you think about that, and perhaps even come back with some questions about how to manage that in the different phases. So that is our webinar for today. We have provided, again, ready-to-use tools that will be posted. So there's the guide, which lays out all of the information today, and actually also lays out information for the next webinar, talking more about building your facilitation skills, which is the title of the next webinar, and provides meeting examples, templates for the different things we talked about, agendas and checklists, and hopefully you can pull from those to help with some work that you have in front of you. And my best hope would be that it would make your life a little bit easier over the next in the next meetings that you have to plan, which I'm sure there are many of them. We wanted to remind everyone that you will receive, if you are signed up for this webinar, you are already registered automatically for the next. Debbie will send out a reminder email the day before anyway, so you will get that in your email. And that the next webinar, Going Deeper, Building Your Facilitation Skills, where we'll kind of use this model to jump into talking about really going deeper into tips and tricks and techniques for managing the meeting itself, and for moving from from information to decision making, and talking about strategies for doing those things. I think that's it. I think we're going to move to questions, unless any of the folks on the call, the panelists on the call, have any last minute additions.
No, I think we should move to questions, Michelle.
Great. Okay, so we are going to move to questions. So Debbie, it's back to you. Thank you everyone very much for staying on the call, and I hope to meet all of you someday. Here you go.
Great. Thanks, Michelle, for the great information. So for those of you on the call, if you do have any questions, thoughts, comments you want to share, you can do that through the questions panel that is on the control panel on your screen. So feel free to go ahead and send any questions that you have over. We've just got a couple of questions that have come in so far. So one is, when a group is working together for the first time, do you have any ideas for icebreakers that participants can use to get to know each other?
Yes, I do have some ideas for icebreakers. So I have a couple of things to say about icebreakers. So depending on the group that you're bringing together, as many of you on this call know, some people really groan when they hear this concept of icebreaker. I'm sorry, there it goes. I had to get rid of my toolbar jumped up here. So just to step back for a minute to answer the question. So I think it's really important to think about your group, because sometimes an icebreaker can be really helpful if it's kind of a setup for the meeting. So for example, if it's a team building meeting, or if it's, there might be an icebreaker that's really about what is your own personal communication style? How do you best take in kind of information? So it can be something that's a little more substantive. But there's also kind of if you want people to get up and move around, there's things like speed meeting, which is a little bit like speed dating, but not really, where people get up and just move around and introduce themselves. You can have folks do a fun question, because if you're really trying to kind of lighten and just give people a chance to get information, it can be, you know, just talk to somebody about the last, your travel destination, your favorite last trip that you took, something, the favorite movie that you just saw. So there's a lot of that around favorite activities, those kinds of things. There are games that you can introduce. I like to focus on what is the agenda topic, and how do I come up with some ideas for icebreakers that actually feel more like a lead into the work. So it's a matter of kind of preference there, and what you know might work with a group. Because if you have a group who, if you do something like say, what is your favorite movie, they're just going to look at you and roll your eyes, then you really want to work more with folks around something like, we're going to do this exercise today because we're in a change management process, and we're going to do this exercise that says, what is one thing that you would leave behind, and what is one thing that you want to bring forward, for example. So that's my answer to that question.
Michelle, this is Lorraine, and I just wanted to add that when we were talking about planning the meeting, we talked about ground rules and establishing culture. So if this is a new group, it's really an icebreaker is an opportunity to set the culture of the group. So I think it's important to know kind of the tone of the meeting and who's going to be there. Do they know each other? And so if there's some hard work that's to be done and you want people to relax and get to know each other, a fun icebreaker might be more appropriate. If this is a really serious group and they know that something like that might not work, and so an icebreaker that might be more focused on kind of content might be more appropriate. So I think those are just a few things I had to say about that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. So another question that we have is, how soon should the note taker make the notes available to participants? Like, is there a recommended follow-up time frame?
Great question. So I want to be respectful when I answer this question, that I know people are busy, but I think I do think if you can do it within 72 hours, I think that's very helpful, or certainly within the week. So if by the end of the week, if the meeting is Monday or Tuesday, meeting is Thursday or Friday, and particularly Fridays are tough, then maybe by Tuesday or Wednesday of the following week. Because I think folks get so busy. We're all so busy, and I can only imagine how busy all of you are, and how, the multiple things that you're dealing with every day. So again, the follow-up doesn't have to be lengthy, but I think the sooner you can do it, the more you start to use this word we're using, to set up the culture of the group and to build the group's confidence that this is an organized process that they really want to participate in.
Great, thank you. So another question is, when you were talking about the conference call tips and tricks, you referenced something called respond in sequence. Can you say a little more about what that means?
Yes. What that, thank you for asking me to clarify. Yeah, responding in sequence, I think, is what it means is that we're going to try to facilitate this call and asking people to wait till the person is finished before I jump in. Or you can have a ground rule that says we're just going to go around the group in this order every time. So it's really trying to avoid folks talking over each other, and also so if folks identify, so responding in sequence can work if one of the rules of the conference call is, for everyone who's talking, please identify yourself, and then every time you speak, hi, this is Michelle, this is what I have to say about that. I just had this request about what it means to respond in sequence, and what it means is that you identify yourself. If you hear someone else speaking, I'm the facilitator, I'm going to step in and say, Devin, could you please let Carrie finish before you jump in, and you'll be next in line. And then waiting for Devin to finish and saying, oh, or Carrie to finish and saying, okay, Devin, you can jump in. So it's letting folks know ahead of time that you're going to play a little bit of air traffic controller and to just be patient. And again, this is a way to establish a rule for a conference call so that what doesn't happen is that people are bumping into each other all the time. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's a great answer. So another question is, do you have any tips for addressing the changing needs of the group that may arise during a meeting, such as running out of time for agenda items?
Yes, so I do, and because you are absolutely correct. It's for those of you who teach classes, it's kind of the same thing. Or when I do a training, I always have more things on my agenda because we probably can do, or in my training curriculum, because the worst thing is to completely run out of time. So I think acknowledging that your agenda is your roadmap, it may or may not be everything that you can do in that meeting. So keeping track of time is one thing. Negotiating for more time. So if you see that halfway you have, let's say it's an hour meeting, or an hour and a half, because I'm going to make an assumption that for a lot of your internal kind of team meetings within your campuses or your networks, you're trying to be very efficient, and you're trying not to run meetings that are more than 2 hours, and a lot of times you're just going to have an hour. And if a topic, if there's more to it, and it can seem like it's going to be a simple topic, like, oh, we're going to conduct this campus visit in 2 weeks, and then there's just a variety of things that have happened. There's going to be a demonstration on campus. There's going to be all these things that are happening. So it ends up being a lot more discussion, and you're 40 minutes in, and you're not going to get to the second agenda item. I think it's really important to stop the meeting and say, look, we're not going to get there, so we either need to move that agenda item to the next meeting, agree to a 30-minute check-in call later in the week, but really to negotiate. And again, it's about having the group help solve the problem. We came here together to do this. It's not going to work today. What are our ideas? Here's my idea for how we could address this. What do people think? And again, it's back to getting those agreements. And I'd be interested to know, Lorraine, as well, if you have any tips around that question.
No, Michelle, I think you took all the tips I had in mind.
Okay, good. Okay, thanks.
Great. Well, thank you for that answer. And I'm not seeing any more questions coming in, so we're going to conclude the web seminar. As a reminder to folks, I will be sending an email out with the tools that were referenced during the web seminar, and there will also be a link for the follow-up survey that we have. It is extremely, extremely brief. It should take you no more than 3 minutes to respond. And so if you have a couple of minutes to just click that link and fill out our survey, we would greatly appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing you all again on February 11th for part 2 of this webinar series. And with that, we conclude today's web seminar.
Thank you very much. Bye, everyone. Have a good day.